Find the Way with Dr. John Radford, one of my favorite people to interview. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show today.
It's great to be with you, Ashley. Thank you.
John is just brilliant at dealing with conflict, and he helps organizations and individuals to take conflict, to work through it, and use it as a point of leverage for creativity, innovation, and growth. And so you've just done some spectacular work over the years in this area. And one thing you did was help in South Africa and even had a connection with Nelson Mandela. If you want to just briefly talk on that.
Yeah, and that connection was, I was working in violence in the country, had got into that. And in fact, there was a defining moment for me in that situation. Triggered, and I had a flashback as Mike was talking earlier, just around, for me, that defining moment was, there was violence, and the connection to Mandela is he was still in jail on Robben Island, and we used to get messages to and from him, which was quite wonderful if you think about the security. And I was working in violence, and I got a summons this one afternoon. I remember the time, it was 1 o'clock, and basically it was a threat from the South African security police. We were working in peace talks, and I was working in a situation where children had been injured and killed. And we began to think there was more to it than what originally was presented. And in that, I was summoned.
Were you terrified? Were you afraid?
Probably not. I mean, I was young, and that helps. But also, when one's working there, you're kind of so involved, you don't even think about that. There were moments, and one of them was what flashed back to me, where I was summoned and basically threatened in terms of my life and situation. And I remember that was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I remember driving for 4 hours in my vehicle. And I was having a conversation. So talk about hearing from God, that's often a time when I was like talking to God. And initially I was quite angry because I felt I'd heard from God earlier, 3 years earlier, when they invited me into this violent side of the work. And how could I end up with my family under threat?
At risk.
And I felt guilty. Yeah. I felt, John, what are you doing in this situation?
Well, this is perfect because you have this conflict and this inner tension. I don't mean perfect the situation. I just mean a perfect segue, right?
Right.
So what do we do? How does conflict then impact the way that we hear God? You just talked about guilt and shame.
And so part of it is when we feel that, guilt is not always a bad thing, right? Because guilt can actually help me account for myself in relation to others. And so it's actually a wake-up call to me. So acknowledging that I'm feeling guilt, often we would kind of want to run from it. Just to acknowledge it is the first step. So just how am I actually dealing with it? So if there's conflict between people, here's the key thing. If there's conflict happening between me and another, say between me and you, Ashley, that conflict, you would see it if you were watching it, you would see it happening, but it's actually going on inside of me and inside of you, right?
But that's the part we don't want to acknowledge or own up to. I want to quickly say, if you would change, or if God would change this situation, this conflict wouldn't be happening inside of me. Absolutely,
because you'll focus on me and I would be focusing on you, right? And I'd be, and that in a way is what happens. But the route to the solution actually doesn't lie just here, because we can argue for hours. We can, and I still might not change, and I certainly won't be changing you by doing that. So that's part of it. So part of it is owning that, and part of hearing from God is, so when I'm in that conflict, if I can go in and say, John, what is that for me? What is going on for me? Then I have a chance, if I can settle that, then I can come back to you in a different sense. And that's God in the process. I can be curious. I wonder what's going on for Ashley in that situation.
What are some of the things sometimes that are going on for people in that conflict? When you say, what is it? Some might say, oh, I don't even know what it is.
They might, right? Because we're not used to looking inside. We're used to looking outwards, right? And so even being aware of it. So we often struggle to say, what is this for me? That's where other people can help us, right? Friends, if I can't work it out with you, if we had the conflict, friends or people can help me understand what's going on for me is a key part of it. And that's part of God's Word. God's Word actually, if you think about it, God's Word is focused on the inner journey for us. What's it like in our life from the inside? Because God works most often, that's hearing from God, as Mike was saying, from the inside out.
Right. So this is about vulnerability then, right?
Yes,
Vulnerability of where I'm at, how I'm seeing myself. What if we're not good at being vulnerable?
And none of us are good at being vulnerable, right? Let's be frank, we're not.
It's
not kind of built in. No,
we say men are worse at it often, right? Women express their feelings or what's going on.
And it's true, not in every case, but there are some gender kind of generalities. And men we want to be a little bit more tough and make it look like that. But in fact, inside we're all the same. So vulnerability is taking what I feel there and sharing it with you. So that's a vulnerable act, because if we were in the conflict actually and I was sharing it with you, I would actually be taking something that's important to me and putting it on the table in that sense. Now what you do with it, I take a risk. But what it does do, one, God gets the message. John is prepared. And in a way, it's a trust in God to do that. And it's also a trust in you. And here's what's interesting. When we're vulnerable, most people, when they sense that vulnerability, it draws them closer, it draws them in, because you also would have that for yourself. And so we begin to have a chance of working this through.
Wow. Just quickly, what about being curious?
Curious, critical, right? Because if I can own it for me and be vulnerable, it releases myself in a way, because I'm not fighting John, and I can be curious about, I wonder what's going on for you. And that curiosity changes the world, literally. It does.
And you believe that this is the start of dealing with conflict too?
It's the start of most conflicts, right? Anything that's enduring, the simple conflict, that's easy, but anything that actually continues or there's a pattern, yeah, it's pretty critical to that.
So if we want to learn more from you and be involved in your community, how can people do that? How can the viewers?
Well, two things. One is my business partner, Viola Neufeld. She wrote a great book, just published, Grateful for the Fight. And we're creating to back that up. And it's really about what we're talking about here in much more depth. And we're backing up with an online community. So people would be able to come in and share and support each other and get some advice.